Previously on Heartland, Georgie revealed her complete wedding vision, surprising the family with unconventional choices. She would walk down the aisle alone to claim her independence rather than being given away. Personal vows would reject traditional language about obedience. Horses would be incorporated meaningfully into the ceremony. A memory table would honor Jack, Tim, and Marion. A communal unity ceremony would involve all guests participating. The casual reception would skip traditions like the bouquet toss. Peter supported the choices despite disappointment about losing the traditional father-daughter moment. Lisa validated the brave decisions. Katie and Lindy remained enthusiastic about the unconventional elements. Amy reassured Georgie that authenticity was never a mistake. The episode ended with the planning foundation set, the family supportive, and 3.5 months until a ceremony that would reflect the couple's truth rather than prescribed tradition. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Western Flavors. If you're enjoying this season, please hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Last episode showed Georgie's unconventional wedding plans, surprising and ultimately winning over the family. Tonight, a complication arises that threatens the outdoor venue, requiring Amy and Ty's expertise to find a solution. Sometimes the perfect plan encounters unexpected obstacles. Sometimes family members with specific knowledge become essential problem solvers. And sometimes backup plans become better than original visions when approached with creativity and flexibility. 2 weeks after the comprehensive planning session, Lou received news that threatened to upend the entire wedding arrangement. She was reviewing final vendor contracts when a call came from the Environmental Assessment Office. The Price Ranch property purchase was proceeding smoothly, but there was a complication regarding the natural amphitheater location Georgie had chosen for her ceremony. Lou's expression grew increasingly concerned as she listened to the official on the other end of the line. When she hung up, she immediately called for a family meeting. The urgency in her voice brought everyone to Fairfield's dining room within minutes. Georgie and Quinn had been working with Phoenix in the barn. Amy and Ty had been reviewing construction progress on the nearly completed Heartland barn. Peter had been on a business call in his temporary office. Lisa had been coordinating with the caterers. Katie and Lindy had been practicing their processional walk in the living room. Everyone dropped what they were doing and gathered quickly. Lou's face showed the stress of someone delivering bad news she knew would be disappointing. She explained that the Environmental Assessment Office had identified the natural amphitheater area as a protected wetland habitat. Apparently, a rare species of native plants grew near the creek, and the area had environmental restrictions that prohibited large gatherings during certain seasons. August fell within the restricted period. The news landed heavily. Georgie's face showed immediate distress. That location had been perfect, exactly what she'd envisioned for the ceremony. The natural beauty, the creek sounds, the way the landscape created acoustics, the sense of privacy and seclusion. Finding out they couldn't use it felt like a devastating setback. So we can't get married there at all? After all the planning, after envisioning everything in that specific spot?
The restrictions are quite clear. No events with more than 10 people during the breeding and growing season for the protected species. We could potentially use it in October, but that conflicts with your show-jumping schedule.
What are our alternatives? Is there anywhere else on the property that could work? Peter pulled out the property maps and spread them across the table. The family gathered around, examining the Price Ranch land and the original Heartland property for possible alternative locations. Lou pointed out several options, but each had significant drawbacks. There was a flat area near the Price Ranch barn, but it lacked the natural beauty and privacy of the amphitheater. The original idea of using the completed Heartland barn as an indoor backup was still viable, but Georgie had been so set on an outdoor ceremony that moving inside felt like a major compromise. There was open pasture land, but it was exposed to full sun with no natural shade, potentially unbearable for guests in August heat. None of the alternatives felt right. Georgie's disappointment was palpable. She'd spent weeks envisioning her ceremony in that specific location, planning how the processional would work, imagining where the horses would be positioned, picturing guests seated among the natural beauty. Having to completely reimagine everything felt overwhelming. Amy had been studying the maps carefully while the discussion continued. She noticed something the others hadn't considered yet. There was another area on the original Heartland property that might work, a section near the old creek bend that Jack had always called the hidden meadow. It was beautiful and private but had never been developed because Jack preferred to keep some of the land wild and natural.
What about the hidden meadow? It's on our original property, so there wouldn't be environmental restrictions. It has natural shade from the trees, it's near the creek so there'd be water sounds, and it's private enough that you'd have the intimacy you want.
I remember that spot. Jack used to take me there when I first came to Heartland. It's beautiful, but it would need some preparation. The ground is uneven in places, and there's overgrowth that would need to be cleared for seating and a ceremony space.
Lou pulled up aerial photographs on her tablet, zooming in on the area Amy had suggested. As everyone examined the images, interest began building. The location had many of the qualities that had made the natural amphitheater appealing: natural beauty, privacy, proximity to water, mature trees providing shade. Georgie studied the photos intently, trying to envision her ceremony in this different space. The disappointment was still evident, but curiosity was beginning to replace despair. She asked if they could go look at it in person rather than just examining photographs. The family walked together to the hidden meadow, following an old path that Jack had maintained throughout his life, but that had become slightly overgrown in recent years. The walk took about 15 minutes from Heartland's main buildings, winding through trees and alongside the creek. When they emerged into the meadow, even Georgie's disappointment couldn't completely suppress her reaction. The space was genuinely beautiful. Mature cottonwood trees formed a natural canopy on one side, providing substantial shade. The creek curved along the meadow's edge, creating the gentle water sounds that would add ambiance to a ceremony. Wildflowers grew naturally throughout the space, and the ground sloped gently in a way that could work well for seating arrangements. But the space also showed signs of neglect. Tall grasses and weeds had taken over significant portions of the meadow. Fallen branches littered the ground. The approach path was narrow and rough, not suitable for guests in dress clothes or for Georgie in a wedding gown. The area where a ceremony would need to take place was uneven and would require substantial leveling. Georgie walked around the space, clearly trying to envision how it could be transformed into a wedding venue. Her expression showed she was torn between the location's potential and the reality of how much work would be required to make it functional. It's beautiful, but it needs so much work. Is there even time to prepare it properly before August? Amy and Ty exchanged glances, both recognizing this as a problem they could help solve. This was their area of expertise: understanding land, working with natural spaces, seeing potential in raw materials. Amy spoke up with growing confidence.
There's time if we approach it systematically. The path would need to be widened and leveled. That's maybe 2 days of work with the right equipment. Clearing the ceremony space and seating area would take another few days. We could leave the wildflowers in most areas, just managing the immediate ceremony footprint.
The ground leveling is the biggest challenge. We'd need to bring in some equipment to create a stable, even surface for seating and the ceremony platform. But it's absolutely doable. We did similar work when we were developing the original Heartland property years ago.
Quinn was examining the space from a practical perspective, thinking about logistics. He asked about access for vendors, parking for guests, where the horses could be positioned during the ceremony, and whether there was enough space for the reception tent Lou had planned. Peter walked the perimeter, measuring distances and calculating what would be required. His business mind was assessing feasibility and costs. After several minutes of examination, he reported that the space could definitely accommodate 50 guests comfortably, with room for ceremony seating, a processional aisle, and areas for horses and other elements they'd planned. Lisa was considering the aesthetic potential. With proper preparation, she noted, this location could actually be more beautiful than the natural amphitheater. It was more private, had better shade, and offered more flexibility for how they arranged the space. The wildflowers alone were stunning. With some selective management, they could create a naturally beautiful setting that required minimal decoration. Lou was already creating mental checklists of what would need to happen and in what sequence: path improvement, ground leveling, selective clearing, seating placement, tent setup, vendor access coordination. It was a substantial project, but not impossible given the timeline they had remaining. Georgie stood in the center of the meadow, turning slowly to take in the space from all angles. Her initial disappointment was clearly giving way to something else: a growing appreciation for this location's unique qualities. After several minutes of silence, she spoke. "This feels right. Different from what I'd imagined, but right. It's more private than the amphitheater would have been. The trees are incredible. And there's something meaningful about getting married on the original Heartland property where Grandpa Jack walked, where this family's history actually happened." Quinn joined her in the center of the space, both of them now actively envisioning their ceremony here rather than mourning the loss of the other location. He pointed out where the ceremony platform could be positioned to take advantage of the natural backdrop, where guests could be seated to have optimal views while being shaded by the trees, where Phoenix and Sultan could be positioned nearby without being disruptive. Amy felt relief seeing Georgie's perspective shift from disappointment to appreciation. She'd been worried that losing the natural amphitheater would devastate Georgie's wedding vision. But this alternative was proving to have its own appeal, perhaps even advantages over the original choice. Ty began explaining the practical steps they'd need to take. First, they'd need to bring in a small excavator to level the ground where the ceremony platform and guest seating would be positioned. That work could start immediately and be completed within a few days. Simultaneously, they could widen and improve the access path using gravel and careful grading to create a stable surface that would be comfortable for guests and safe for Georgie in her wedding gown. The selective clearing could be done by hand over several days. They'd leave the wildflowers and natural vegetation in most areas, only managing the spaces that needed to be functional for the ceremony and reception. The goal would be to enhance the natural beauty rather than transforming it into something overly manicured. Peter offered to coordinate the equipment rental and scheduling. Lou volunteered to manage the vendor coordination, ensuring everyone understood the new location and adjusted their plans accordingly. Lisa said she'd work with the florist to adapt the decoration plans to take advantage of the natural beauty already present. Katie and Lindy were exploring the meadow with enthusiasm, finding perfect spots for pre-ceremony photos, imagining where they'd stand during the processional, and discussing how magical it would be getting ready with Georgie and then walking through the trees to reach the ceremony space. Over the next week, the transformation of the hidden meadow began. Amy and Ty took the lead on the physical work, coordinating with contractors and also doing substantial labor themselves. The excavator arrived early one morning and spent 2 days carefully leveling the ground where the ceremony would take place. Ty supervised closely, ensuring the work preserved as much of the natural vegetation as possible while creating the stable, even surface they needed. Amy oversaw the path improvement project. A local landscaping company widened the trail from Heartland's main area to the meadow, removing obstacles and laying gravel to create a stable surface. They installed subtle solar lighting along the path that would be invisible during the day, but would provide gentle illumination for evening access. The selective clearing happened over several days with help from Quinn, Peter, and even Katie and Lindy when they weren't in school. They removed fallen branches, managed the tall grass in specific areas, and created defined spaces for different ceremony elements while leaving the majority of the meadow in its natural state. Georgie visited the site daily, watching the transformation unfold and providing input about what she wanted preserved versus what could be modified. She developed a clear vision for how the space would work, and Amy and Ty worked hard to bring that vision to reality while also contributing their own expertise about what would function best logistically. One afternoon, Amy and Georgie stood together surveying the progress. The ceremony area was taking shape beautifully. The leveled ground provided a stable platform, the cleared seating area could accommodate the guest count comfortably, and the improved path made access genuinely easy while still maintaining a natural feel. This is becoming more beautiful than I imagined. Thank you for suggesting it and for all the work you're putting into making it functional.
That's what family does. When obstacles arise, we find solutions together. And honestly, I think this location is going to be more meaningful than the amphitheater would have been. Jack spent time here throughout his life. There's history in this ground.
Do you think he'd approve of what we're doing? Using his hidden meadow for a wedding ceremony?
He'd be thrilled. Jack loved seeing land used for meaningful purposes, and he especially loved when family gathered to celebrate important moments. Having your wedding in a place he treasured would honor his memory beautifully.
They stood together in comfortable silence, both imagining how the space would look on the actual wedding day. With guests seated among the wildflowers, the processional happening along the improved path through the trees, the ceremony taking place with the creek providing gentle background sounds, horses positioned nearby representing the profession and passion that defined both bride and groom. Ty joined them, reporting that the major groundwork was complete. The remaining preparation would be detail-oriented, finalizing the exact ceremony platform placement, determining the optimal seating arrangement, coordinating with vendors about access and setup. But the hard physical labor was essentially finished. That evening, the family gathered for dinner at Fairfield. The conversation naturally turned to the venue transformation and how dramatically the situation had improved from the initial disappointment when they'd learned about the amphitheater restrictions. Quinn expressed gratitude to Amy and Ty for their expertise and labor. Without their knowledge of the property and their willingness to take on substantial physical work, the venue change could have been a disaster rather than an opportunity. Peter noted that the experience illustrated an important principle: obstacles often led to better outcomes than original plans if approached with creativity and flexibility. The environmental restrictions that had seemed devastating initially had actually pushed them toward a location with more meaning and potentially more beauty than the amphitheater would have offered. Lou agreed, adding that the hidden meadow was more private and intimate than the amphitheater would have been. It felt more appropriate for the kind of ceremony Georgie and Quinn were planning: unconventional, personal, focused on meaning rather than spectacle. Lisa observed that the wildflowers alone were stunning enough that they'd need minimal additional decoration. The natural beauty of the space would speak for itself. The florist would just need to enhance what was already present rather than trying to create beauty from scratch. Katie asked if she and Lindy could visit the meadow regularly before the wedding to help maintain it and watch it continue transforming as the ceremony date approached. Georgie happily agreed, appreciating her sister's enthusiasm and her desire to be involved in preparing the space. Lindy wanted to know if they could plant anything special in the meadow that would bloom in time for the wedding. Amy explained that August was tricky for planting, but they could potentially add some container plants near the ceremony area that could be moved into position for the event and then planted permanently afterward as a living memorial to the wedding day. The conversation continued through dinner, everyone contributing ideas and observations. The crisis that had threatened to derail the wedding planning had been not only resolved but transformed into an opportunity that had brought the family closer together through collaborative problem-solving. 2 weeks before the wedding, the hidden meadow was essentially complete. The final vendor walkthrough happened on a sunny afternoon with Lou coordinating. The caterer examined the space and confirmed the reception could work beautifully under a tent positioned at the meadow's edge. The photographer walked the entire area, identifying perfect spots for pre-ceremony, ceremony, and post-ceremony photos. The rental company measured and marked where seating would be positioned, where the ceremony platform would be placed, and where the horses would be stationed. The officiant visited to familiarize herself with the space and develop a sense of how the ceremony would flow. She'd been working with Georgie and Quinn on their personal vows and ceremony structure, and seeing the actual location helped her understand how to guide the event effectively. Georgie brought Phoenix to the meadow to acclimate him to the space. Quinn did the same with Sultan. Both horses needed to be comfortable in the location, so they'd be calm and manageable during the actual ceremony. Amy supervised, providing expertise about how to help the horses adjust to what would be a somewhat unusual situation for them. The 2 horses responded well to the meadow. Phoenix seemed particularly at ease, perhaps sensing the peaceful energy of a place Jack had treasured. Sultan took a bit more time to relax, but within an hour he too was grazing contentedly and showing no signs of stress. Amy explained to Georgie that they'd bring the horses to the meadow several more times before the wedding, always during different times of day, so they'd be familiar with the space under various conditions. The goal was to make the wedding day itself feel routine rather than novel and potentially stressful for the animals. One afternoon a week before the wedding, Amy and Ty took Georgie and Quinn on a final walkthrough of the entire setup. They started at Heartland's main buildings where guests would park and initially gather. Then they walked the improved path to the meadow, experiencing what guests would experience. The path was beautiful, now natural but accessible, with solar lighting that would guide evening access, wide enough for comfortable walking but not so developed that it felt artificial. The walk through the trees created a sense of transition, separating the ceremony space from everyday life and creating anticipation. When they emerged into the meadow, the transformation was striking. The ceremony area was clearly defined but felt completely natural. The wildflowers were at their peak, creating splashes of color throughout the space. The trees provided substantial shade, and the creek sounds added the peaceful ambiance Georgie had wanted. Georgie stood where she would stand during the ceremony, looking out at where guests would be seated, where her parents and family would be positioned, where the horses would be nearby. Her expression showed a mixture of excitement and nervousness about the reality that in 1 week, this would all be happening. It's perfect. More perfect than I imagined. Thank you both for making this possible.
We're honored to contribute. Weddings are about family coming together, and being able to help create the space where yours happens means a lot to us.
Quinn walked the processional path, imagining how he'd feel waiting at the ceremony platform, while Georgie walked alone toward him through the space they'd created together with family. The unconventional choice of her walking alone felt even more powerful in this intimate setting than it might have in a larger, more formal venue. Amy pointed out some final details that would be added in the days immediately before the wedding. Subtle ribbon marking where the processional path would run, simple floral arrangements at the ceremony platform that would complement the wildflowers without overwhelming them, seating that would be comfortable but understated. Every element designed to enhance rather than compete with the natural beauty. The evening before the final preparation week began, the family gathered in the hidden meadow for a quiet sunset together. No agenda, no planning discussion, just time in the space where Georgie would soon marry Quinn. The light filtering through the trees was golden and soft. The wildflowers glowed in the warm evening sun. The creek sounds were peaceful and constant. Birds were singing their evening songs. The atmosphere was magical, exactly what Georgie had wanted, even if she'd initially envisioned it happening in a different location. Lisa spoke up with an observation that captured what they were all feeling. Jack would love knowing his hidden meadow is being used this way. He always said the land's purpose was to serve life, not just to exist unused. Having a wedding here fulfills that purpose beautifully. Lou added that the venue change, as stressful as it had been initially, had actually led to something more meaningful than the original plan. Sometimes obstacles were blessings that pushed people toward better outcomes than they'd envisioned. Peter noted that the amount of work Amy and Ty had contributed made this wedding possible in ways beyond just providing a space. Their expertise, their labor, their willingness to problem solve when obstacles arose, that was what family did for each other. Katie and Lindy were sitting together at the edge of the meadow, already practicing their processional walk and imagining how they'd feel on the actual wedding day. Their enthusiasm remained undiminished despite all the planning complications and changes. Georgie stood with Quinn, both of them taking in the space that would frame their ceremony in just 1 week. The journey to this point had been long and sometimes difficult. The planning had required compromise and flexibility. The venue change had initially felt like a disaster. But standing here now, everything felt exactly right.
1 week from today, you'll be married. In this spot with this family, surrounded by the natural beauty Jack treasured. All the planning, all the obstacles, all the decisions they've led to this moment, and it's going to be beautiful.
I know, I can feel it. This is where I'm meant to get married. Not the amphitheater, not some formal venue somewhere else, right here in the hidden meadow where Grandpa Jack walked, where this land holds decades of family history. They stayed until the sun set completely, the solar lights along the path beginning to glow softly as darkness fell. The meadow transformed in evening light, becoming even more magical and intimate than it appeared during the day. As they walked back to Heartland along the improved path, the family felt the anticipation building. 1 week until the ceremony. 1 week until Georgie married Quinn in a space that had been created through family collaboration when obstacles threatened to derail everything. 1 week until a celebration that would honor the past while building toward the future. The venue was decided, the space was prepared, the family was ready, and in 7 days the hidden meadow would host a wedding that reflected everything the Bartlett family valued: authenticity over convention, meaning over spectacle, and love expressed through sacrifice and service to each other. The episode ends with the venue crisis resolved through Amy and Ty's expertise and labor. The protected amphitheater location couldn't be used due to environmental restrictions, but Amy suggested Jack's hidden meadow on the original Heartland property as an alternative. The family walked the space together and recognized its potential. Over 2 weeks, Amy and Ty led the transformation, leveling ground, improving the access path, clearing selectively while preserving natural beauty. The work brought the family together through collaborative problem solving. Georgie's initial disappointment transformed into appreciation for a location with more meaning and history than the amphitheater would have offered. Final walkthroughs showed the space was perfect natural beauty, enhanced rather than overwhelmed, intimate and private, connected to Jack's legacy. The family gathered for sunset in the meadow 1 week before the ceremony, feeling anticipation and gratitude. The episode ends with the venue prepared, the family ready, and 7 days until a wedding that will happen in a space created through family love and collaboration. Next time on Heartland, Georgie Fleming Morris McGregor officially married. The wedding day arrives with perfect weather and careful final preparations. Early morning gets Georgie ready with Lou, Katie, Lindy, and Amy helping. Emotional moments as the bride prepares in the space where Jack once taught her about horses. Quinn waits at the ceremony with Peter, Ty, and his family. Guests arrive and walk the beautiful path to the hidden meadow. The unconventional ceremony unfolds: Georgie walking alone, personal vows shared, horses present, communal unity ceremony, memory table honoring Jack, Tim, and Marion. The celebration that reflects authenticity over tradition. The episode captures every moment of a day that honors the past while building the future. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Until next time, this is Western Flavors.